The house felt unnaturally quiet the morning my mother died. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the heavy kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Her alarm clock still rang at 6, the same soft tune she had used for years, and for a moment I forgot she was gone. I waited for the sound of her feet on the floor, for her gentle voice calling my name from the kitchen, reminding me not to skip breakfast. It never came. Her room looked untouched, as if she had simply stepped out for a moment. Her slippers were neatly placed beside the bed, her shawl folded with care, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and the medicine she had taken every night. I stood there longer than I should have, hoping grief would somehow reverse itself if I stayed still enough. By noon, the house filled with relatives and neighbors dressed in white and gray. Their words blurred together. She was such a good woman. She suffered quietly. Where is her husband? I answered the last question with a tight smile. He's traveling. What I didn't say was that my father wasn't delayed by work or an emergency. While my mother's body lay covered in flowers, he was thousands of miles away, sharing sunsets and laughter with another woman. I knew because the truth had found me the night before, cruel and unavoidable. His tablet, carelessly left unlocked, had lit up with a message, "I wish you were still here." This trip meant everything to me. Everything. At the funeral ground, I stood alone beside my mother's coffin. The priest's prayers echoed, but I heard nothing. My hands shook as I threw the first handful of earth, the sound of it hitting the wood echoing inside my chest. I searched the crowd one last time, even though I already knew he wouldn't be there. He never came. When the last guest left and the sun began to set, the house returned to its silence. That night, I sat on my bed, still wearing my funeral clothes, staring at the door as if he might walk in and explain everything. Instead, my phone buzzed, a picture, a beach, 2 glasses of wine, no apology, no regret. That was the moment grief turned into resolve. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't scream. I didn't call him. I simply understood one truth with painful clarity. My mother had been buried that day, but something else had died too. The daughter who trusted her father. 3 days after the funeral, the house still smelled like incense and wilted flowers. Every corner carried a reminder of my mother, making it impossible to grieve in peace. I decided to clean her room, not because I was ready, but because staying still hurt more than moving forward. I started with her cupboard. Her clothes were folded exactly the way she had always kept them, color, coded and carefully pressed. As I touched the fabric, memories surfaced, her humming while ironing, her quiet smile when she thought no one was watching. I folded everything slowly, as if rushing would erase her presence. At the back of the cupboard, beneath a stack of old saris, I noticed something unusual. A small wooden box, worn at the edges, hidden where no one would casually look. My heart began to pound as I opened it. Inside were documents neatly tied with a ribbon, bank statements, property papers. A will. My breath caught. My mother had never spoken about these things. She always said my father handled everything. But as I read, a different story unfolded. Properties I thought belonged to my father were transferred years ago. Savings accounts existed in my name. Dates and signatures appeared again and again, silent proof of careful planning. At the bottom of the box lay several handwritten letters. They were my mother's words, written in shaky but determined handwriting. She wrote about the night she discovered the affair, about the lies, the promises, and the long years she spent pretending to believe him. She wrote about staying quiet for my sake, about swallowing her pain so I could grow up in a stable home. One letter was addressed to me. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to protect you. It began, "I know your father has his weaknesses. I forgave him many times, but I never forgot. I prepared quietly, not out of bitterness, but out of love for you. Whatever happens, stand strong. Do not beg for respect. Claim it. Tears soaked the paper as I held it against my chest. That evening, my father finally returned. He walked into the house with tired eyes and practiced sadness. He hugged me briefly and said, "Your mother wouldn't want us to stay broken. Life must go on." I looked at him and nodded, hiding the truth behind a calm expression. He had no idea that my mother, the woman he had betrayed, had already rewritten the future, and I was no longer the unaware child he believed me to be. After my father returned, the house felt different. Not emptier, but unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves no longer recognized him. He moved through rooms cautiously, avoiding my mother's photograph, avoiding silence. Within weeks, he began staying out late, answering calls in hushed tones, stepping outside whenever his phone rang. I didn't question him. I didn't need to. One evening, he sat across from me at the dining table and cleared his throat. "There's something I want you to know," he said, forcing a calm tone. "I've met someone. She makes me feel alive again." The words landed without shock. I simply nodded. A few days later, he brought her home. She arrived with confidence, dressed neatly, smiling as if she belonged there. She looked around the house with open curiosity, her eyes lingering on the furniture, the walls, the space my mother had filled with love. When she looked at me, there was no apology in her gaze, only assessment. "I've heard so much about you," she said warmly, extending her hand. I shook it politely, wondering how easily people could step into someone else's life without carrying the weight of what they had destroyed. Soon, plans were being made. I overheard conversations about selling the house, about traveling, about starting fresh somewhere far away. My father laughed more than he had in years. He looked lighter, convinced he had escaped consequence. One night, he announced a family discussion. He spoke confidently, explaining that he intended to sell the house and move forward with his new life. Holding on to the past helps no one. He said, "This house is mine, and it's time to move on." I waited until he finished. "You can't sell it," I said quietly. He laughed, dismissive. "You're grieving. You'll understand later." I stood up and placed the folder on the table. Inside were the documents my mother had left behind. Property deeds, bank transfers, legal confirmations. The smile slowly faded from his face as he read. His hands trembled. The room fell silent except for the sound of papers turning. This isn't possible," he whispered. "It is," I replied calmly. "Everything was transferred years ago, legally." His partner shifted uncomfortably, her excitement replaced with unease. She realized in that moment that the future she imagined had vanished. "You knew?" my father asked, voice cracking. "Yes," I said, "and she knew you'd fail us again." That night, she left without saying goodbye. For the first time, my father sat alone, staring at the ruins of a victory he had celebrated too soon. The house grew quiet again after she left. Not the painful silence that followed my mother's death, but a different kind, one that felt settled, final. My father moved through the rooms slowly now, like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. The confidence he once carried had dissolved into something fragile. He tried to talk to me that night. His voice shook as he apologized, explaining loneliness, regret, and mistakes he claimed he never meant to make. He spoke about love as if it were something that simply happened to him, something beyond his control. I listened without interrupting. For the first time, I realized I didn't need answers. I didn't need excuses or promises. The truth had already been spoken through actions, not words. Within a month, my father moved into a small rented apartment nearby. He took only a suitcase of clothes and a few personal items. The rest of the house remained unchanged. preserved exactly as my mother had left it. Her room stayed closed, not as a punishment, but as a place of quiet respect. I began rebuilding my life slowly. I handled finances my mother had prepared me for without my knowing. Each decision felt guided by her presence, as if she were standing behind me, steady and proud. In her name, I donated a portion of the money to a women's shelter, a place for those who had suffered in silence the way she had. My father visited occasionally. He looked older each time, carrying regret like a shadow he couldn't escape. He never asked for anything, he never complained. Perhaps losing everything taught him what words never could. On the first anniversary of my mother's death, I lit a candle in her room. I sat beside her photograph and spoke aloud, my voice calm and certain. "I'm okay. I told her, you protected me even when I didn't know I needed it." There were no tears this time, only gratitude. I understood then that revenge doesn't always arrive with confrontation or cruelty. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through survival, independence, and peace. My father lost his family the moment he chose another life. I gained mine the moment I chose to stand firm, and in the end, the greatest justice wasn't watching him fall apart. It was rising, whole and unbroken, exactly as my mother had hoped.